Beneath the ruins of ancient temples and the whispers of old prophecies lies the legend of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, bringer of knowledge, and harbinger of change. For centuries, tales foretold his return, a moment when the world would shift and old truths would rise again. From the heart of the Aztec Empire to the pages of sacred codices, his story bridges the divine and the mortal, the past and the future. Join us as we unearth the myths, decode the prophecies, and explore whether Quetzalcoatl's return is just legend or a destiny yet to unfold. For the Aztec people and their ancestors across Mesoamerica, few figures loomed as large in both mythology and spiritual life as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. His name, drawn from the Nahuatl words Quetzal, the brilliantly plumed bird of the tropics, and Codal serpent, captures his dual nature, creature of the sky and the earth, spirit of wisdom and strength, a god who bridges heaven and humanity. The stories of Quetzalcoatl's deeds, exile, and prophesied return have fascinated scholars, mystics, and storytellers for centuries. They are not merely myths locked in the past, but living ideas that continue to inspire interpretations, artistic expressions, and even political narratives today. To understand his return, we must first journey into the ancient world that birthed him, unpack his symbolic meaning, and explore how his story evolved through history. The origins of the feathered serpent. Quetzalcoatl's origins predate the Aztec Empire itself. Archaeological evidence shows that the feathered serpent was revered as far back as the Olmec and Teotihuacan civilizations, centuries before the Aztecs rose to power in the Valley of Mexico. In Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, built around the 3rd century CE, is adorned with elaborate carvings of a plumed serpent intertwined with seashells and water imagery. Here, the deity likely represented fertility, wind, and the life-giving rain, elements essential to sustaining a great city in the highlands of central Mexico. When the Toltecs rose centuries later in the city of Tula, they embraced Quetzalcoatl as a central god, associating him with knowledge, priesthood, and moral order. By the time the Aztecs emerged in the 14th century, Quetzalcoatl was already woven into a vast Mesoamerican tapestry of religious symbolism. Quetzalcoatl in Aztec cosmology. For the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl was more than a rain or wind god. He was a creator deity. In the Aztec creation myths recorded in later codices, Quetzalcoatl and his counterpart Tezcatlipoca shaped the world from the body of a primordial monster. He was also said to have descended into the underworld, Mictlan, to retrieve the bones of past generations, which he used to create humanity. His domain included wind as Quetzalcoatl. He was the god of breath and life's animating force. Learning and arts, patron of knowledge, science, poetry, and calendars. Moral order. In some traditions, he opposed human sacrifice and promoted offerings of flowers, birds, and butterflies instead. Venus, associated with the planet as the morning star, symbolizing cycles of death and rebirth. Quetzalcoatl thus embodied both the physical and spiritual forces that sustain life. His serpent body tied him to the earth, while his Quetzal feathers lifted him toward the divine. The tale of exile and the promise of return. The most enduring part of Quetzalcoatl's myth is his departure and the promise of his return. According to later Aztec sources, Quetzalcoatl once ruled as a wise and benevolent leader in the legendary city of Tallin, often associated with Tula. He governed with justice, taught agriculture and crafts, and discouraged needless bloodshed. But his reign ended in tragedy. In many versions, Tezcatlipoca, the god of night and sorcery, tricked Quetzalcoatl into drunkenness or shame, leading him to abandon his throne. In some accounts, Quetzalcoatl cast himself into a funeral pyre and from his ashes rose the morning star, his celestial form. In others, he set sail eastward on a raft of serpents or reeds, vowing to return one day from across the sea. This prophecy of return became deeply ingrained in Aztec lore, giving the feathered serpent a powerful eschatological role, one who would restore cosmic balance at a time of upheaval. The Spanish conquest and the prophecy. One of the most controversial intersections between myth and history comes with the arrival of Hernán Cortés in 1519. Later Spanish chroniclers claimed that the Aztec ruler Moctezuma II believed Cortés might be the returning Quetzalcoatl, due to the timing of his arrival, his fair skin, and his coming from the east. However, modern scholars debate whether this was truly an Aztec belief before the conquest, or whether it was partly shaped or exaggerated by Spanish accounts to frame their invasion as destiny rather than conquest. Regardless of its historical accuracy, the return of Quetzalcoatl became one of the most famous examples of how indigenous prophecy could be reinterpreted or exploited in the wake of colonization. Symbolism of the return. To the Aztecs, the return of Quetzalcoatl was not necessarily a literal expectation of a god walking the earth again. In many Mesoamerican worldviews, time was cyclical. The morning star disappears and reappears. The seasons die and are reborn. Empires rise and fall. Thus, the return could symbolize a restoration of balance, a time when moral order replaces chaos, a renewal of knowledge, the rebirth of wisdom, learning, and culture, a cosmic shift, the end of one age sun, and the beginning of another in the Aztec calendar. This symbolic view means the prophecy could be fulfilled in many ways, not just by a divine figure's physical reappearance, but by societal renewal. Quetzalcoatl beyond the Aztecs. Even after the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521, the figure of Quetzalcoatl persisted. Indigenous communities continued to honor him under syncretic forms, sometimes blending his image with Christian saints or angels. In the modern era, Mexican national identity has occasionally embraced Quetzalcoatl as a symbol of pre-Hispanic heritage and intellectual achievement. Artists such as Diego Rivera depicted him as a culture bearer, while philosophers and writers used him as a metaphor for rebirth after oppression. In New Age and Neo-Mesoamerican spirituality, Quetzalcoatl has also become a symbol of planetary awakening, often linked, sometimes loosely, to the Mayan calendar cycles that gained global attention in 2012. The Feathered Serpent's archetype. Why does Quetzalcoatl's myth endure? Part of the answer lies in his archetypal power. He is the culture hero, bringing arts, agriculture, and ethics to humanity. The dying rising god, passing through death or exile to return renewed. The mediator, bridging opposites, sky and earth, man and God, life and death. These archetypes resonate across cultures. Osiris in Egypt, Prometheus in Greece, and Christ in Christianity all share thematic echoes. Unearthing the legends today. Modern archaeology, anthropology, and indigenous oral traditions continue to shed light on Quetzalcoatl's many layers. Excavations at Teotihuacan reveal his early role as a fertility and storm deity. Codices such as the Florentine Codex and Codex Borbonicus preserve Aztec interpretations, though filtered through post-conquest contexts. But the most profound unearthing is cultural. The ongoing revival of indigenous heritage in Mexico and beyond. For many, reclaiming Quetzalcoatl's story is not about waiting for a god's literal return, but about restoring the wisdom, values, and balance he represents. Quetzalcoatl and the cycles of time. In the Aztec worldview, time was divided into suns, eras of creation and destruction. We live in the fifth sun, destined to end in earthquakes. The return of Quetzalcoatl could be tied to the transition between suns, marking the end of one cosmic cycle and the dawn of another. His association with Venus further reinforces this cyclical nature. The planet's visibility as the morning star and evening star follows a predictable pattern, disappearing for days before returning in a blaze of light, mirroring his mythic exile and comeback. The return in modern imagination. Today, Quetzalcoatl's return inspires everything from political speeches to speculative fiction. For some, he is a symbol of indigenous resistance, a reminder that the wisdom of Mesoamerica still has a place in shaping the future. For others, he is a mystical archetype heralding a new consciousness for humanity. In literature and popular media, Quetzalcoatl often appears as a mysterious guide or a force that intervenes in times of crisis. His image, feathers and scales entwined, remains one of the most iconic symbols of Mesoamerican heritage. In the annals of Mesoamerican history, the image of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl in Nahuatl, still glimmers like sunlight on emerald plumage. For over 1,000 years, his myth has traveled through temples, codices, oral traditions, and the imaginations of generations. Unlike many deities whose relevance wanes with the fall of their civilizations, Quetzalcoatl's presence seems to grow stronger over time, adapting to new contexts and speaking in fresh voices. To the Aztecs and the Toltecs before them, Quetzalcoatl was a bringer of life, wisdom, and moral order. But his story was not static. It contained one of the most compelling promises in human mythology, the prophecy of his return. For centuries, this return was often imagined as a single dramatic moment, a god descending from the heavens or arriving from across the sea to set the world right. Yet perhaps that vision is too narrow. Perhaps the feathered serpent's return is not an apocalyptic event marked on a single date, but an ongoing process. Perhaps it is already happening, not in the form of one miraculous appearance, but through the gradual revival of ancient wisdom, the awakening of ethical leadership, and a collective movement toward harmony with nature. The roots of the feathered serpent. To understand why Quetzalcoatl's return may be a process rather than an event, we must first trace his roots. The image of the plumed serpent predates the Aztec Empire by centuries, emerging in early civilizations such as the Olmec and Teotihuacan cultures. At Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, built in the 3rd century CE, is adorned with rows of carved serpent heads, each framed by stylized feathers. These early depictions link the god to fertility, rain, wind, and the cyclical renewal of life. By the Toltec era, roughly 900 to 1150 CE, Quetzalcoatl was elevated into a god-king archetype, a wise ruler who taught the arts, science, and ethical governance. The Aztecs inherited this dual image of Quetzalcoatl as both a cosmic force and a moral exemplar. His symbolism was rich and multi-layered. The serpent, grounded in the earth, connected to fertility, renewal, and transformation. The feathers, signifying transcendence, flight, and the spiritual realm. Venus as morning star, representing cycles of death and rebirth. This balance between the earthly and the divine made Quetzalcoatl uniquely suited to be a bridge, a figure who could link human society with higher principles. 2. The myth of departure. The core of Quetzalcoatl's enduring power lies in his departure from the human world and his promise to return. In Toltec legend, he was betrayed or tricked into shame by his rival Tezcatlipoca. Some versions say he set himself aflame and rose as the morning star. Others say he sailed east on a raft of serpents, vowing to come back in a time of need. This is not the story of a god who dies permanently. It is the story of a god who steps away, leaving humanity to wrestle with its own challenges, but who remains a latent force, a seed lying dormant until the right season. Because of this, the return of Quetzalcoatl is inherently tied to cycles. Just as Venus vanishes and then reappears in the sky, the feathered serpent disappears from view only to rise again in another form. 3. The Spanish conquest and the prophecies recasting. The arrival of Hernán Cortés in 1519 is perhaps the most famous and most debated moment in the history of the Quetzalcoatl prophecy. Some post-conquest sources claim that the Aztec ruler Moctezuma, too initially suspected Cortés might be the returning feathered serpent, arriving from the east in the year Suacatl, a date associated with Quetzalcoatl cycle. Modern historians remain divided on whether this belief truly influenced Moctezuma's decisions or whether it was a colonial narrative designed to legitimize the conquest. Regardless of the historical truth, this episode reshaped the legend in global consciousness. The return was reframed from a metaphorical or cyclical renewal into the dramatic appearance of a singular figure. But in doing so, something of the deeper meaning may have been lost. 4. Return as process, not event. When we view Quetzalcoatl's return through the lens of Mesoamerican cosmology, it becomes clear that it doesn't have to mean a literal reappearance. Time was not seen as linear, but as a series of recurring cycles, each marked by renewal and transformation. Within this worldview, a return can be a gradual unfolding, like the slow change of seasons. This opens the door for a reinterpretation, a revival of ancient wisdom, rediscovering sustainable agricultural practices, traditional medicine, and philosophical insights from Mesoamerican heritage. An awakening of ethical leadership, leaders who govern with justice, humility, and service, echoing Quetzalcoatl's legendary reign. A societal shift toward harmony with nature, moving away from exploitation of the earth and toward reciprocal relationships with the environment. Instead of waiting for a singular supernatural event, the return becomes something we participate in, through choices, values, and cultural revival. Ancient wisdom in a modern world. One way the feathered serpent flies today is through the preservation and revival of indigenous knowledge. Across Mexico and Central America, communities are reclaiming pre-Hispanic languages, rituals, and agricultural techniques. For example, milpa agriculture, a traditional polyculture of maize, beans, and squash, embodies ecological wisdom that nourished Mesoamerica for millennia. Calendrical systems, based on solar and Venus cycles, reflect deep astronomical knowledge still relevant for understanding environmental rhythms. Ceremonial practices, from dances to offerings, reconnect communities to a sense of sacred reciprocity with nature. These practices, once suppressed under colonial rule, are now being embraced as tools for resilience in the face of climate change and cultural homogenization. In this sense, the return of Quetzalcoatl is already happening, in the revival of a worldview that honors balance over domination. 6. Ethical leadership as the new reign of Quetzalcoatl. In the legends, Quetzalcoatl ruled not with tyranny, but with wisdom and fairness. He opposed needless bloodshed and encouraged offerings of beauty and art instead of violence. In a world plagued by corruption, exploitation, and distrust of institutions, the idea of leadership modeled after Quetzalcoatl's example feels revolutionary. A return of the feathered serpent could manifest as leaders, whether political, community-based, or spiritual, who embody humility instead of arrogance, service instead of self-interest, vision grounded in both practical needs and higher ideals. This is not about one messianic figure, but about a transformation in collective expectations of leadership, a shift that could ripple through societies in ways just as powerful as the arrival of a god. 7. Harmony with nature, the cosmic balance restored. Quetzalcoatl's serpent form ties him to the earth, while his feathers connect him to the heavens. This duality mirrors the balance that many indigenous traditions see as essential between humans and the natural world. Modern industrial society often treats nature as a resource to be consumed rather than a partner to be respected. But the growing global movements for ecological stewardship, reforestation, and renewable energy echo the ethos of the feathered serpent, recognizing that survival depends on balance. This harmony is not nostalgic romanticism. It is a practical necessity. As climate change intensifies, the wisdom of Quetzalcoatl's symbolism, that prosperity flows from balance, not domination, feels increasingly urgent. 8. The archetype lives on. Across cultures, archetypes of the dying and returning God endure because they mirror human experience. We all go through cycles of loss and renewal, exile and return, darkness and light. Quetzalcoatl fits into a universal pattern that includes figures like Osiris in Egypt, Dionysus in Greece, and Christ in Christianity. But his particular blend of groundedness, serpent, and transcendence feathers makes him especially relevant in a world seeking to balance material needs with spiritual meaning. He is a reminder that we need both bread for the body and vision for the soul. 9. The return as a mirror. If the return of Quetzalcoatl is a process, then it acts as a mirror. It reflects the question back to us. What would it mean for the feathered serpent to live again in our time? Would it mean rethinking our economies to prioritize sustainability over exploitation? Would it mean redefining progress to include well-being, justice, and cultural integrity? Would it mean reviving forgotten stories and songs that root us in our shared humanity? The answer may be that Quetzalcoatl returns whenever we align our actions with the balance he represents. X. The feathered serpent still flies. Today, murals, sculptures, and festivals across Mexico and beyond keep Quetzalcoatl's image alive. He soars not only through the skies of myth, but through the realms of art, activism, and community memory. His flight is not bound to a single place or moment. It is carried on the wind of every effort to restore wisdom, justice, and balance. His feathers are seen in every cultural renaissance. His coils felt in every movement to protect the earth. The prophecy of return, then, is less about looking to the horizon for a singular figure and more about recognizing the ways he already moves among us, in ideas, in actions, in values. Living the return. Quetzalcoatl's return, if seen as a process, transforms the prophecy from passive waiting into active participation. It tells us that the feathered serpent will fly again whenever we revive the wisdom of the past to guide the present, demand and embody ethical leadership, live in harmony with the natural world. In this light, the return is not something to watch for, but something to do. We are not mere spectators. We are participants in the unfolding flight of the feathered serpent. The ancient myths remind us that every ending is a beginning, every exile a prelude to return. Quetzalcoatl may have left Talon long ago, but his spirit remains in the cycles of time, in the rhythms of the earth, and in the human capacity for renewal. And so, the feathered serpent still flies, sometimes in the sky of myth, sometimes in the quiet changes of the heart, and sometimes in the sweeping movements of cultures reclaiming their soul. His wings beat not only in the heavens, but in the spaces between us, calling us to rise, to renew, and to return to the balance that makes life whole. The legend of Quetzalcoatl is more than a tale of the past. It's a mirror reflecting humanity's endless search for wisdom, balance, and renewal. As we peel back the layers of Aztec prophecy, we find not just the story of a god, but a timeless call to awaken. Whether his return is written in the stars or in the hearts of those who remember, the feathered serpent's spirit still stirs in the world today. If this journey into ancient truths has inspired you, like, share, and subscribe, and let the whispers of the past guide you toward the mysteries yet to come.